but also taking care of all the other dimensions that schools, especially in Africa, definitely provide: nutrition, health, security, and all these dimensions that are not absolutely to be taken for granted in such a region. The second dimension is about advocacy. We advocate as the UN for a comprehensive approach that can really mobilize, especially in the more important multilateral mechanism about investing in education and prioritizing education as the top topic in the global agenda. And I think that on that side, the relationship between Europe, Africa, through networks of universities and establishing a real capacity development in the continent to build ecosystems for innovation is the next step to be developed. And the third dimension I wish to recall, I'm sure other speakers will develop on that, is the need of better data to understand where we have to focus on, which are the gaps that definitely already put Africa behind, not only in terms of achieving SDG 4, as quality inclusive education for all in a continent that already had 200 million children not being able to read or understand a basic test before the crisis, but also in terms of being able to invest in specific policies. UNESCO, of course, is doing a coordinating work within the UN system, is responsible, as maybe you know, through the UNESCO Institute of Statistics of collecting data. And I think that the new horizon of this partnership in a couple of days will be in Catania for the Ministerial Conference DG20, is about, in Education Ministerial Conference and Labor, joint declaration will be delivered, and I think that in that context it's important that the issue of human capital and gender dimension can be absolutely considered as one of the main tool we have to unlock the potential of a continent that has, of course, beyond natural resources and many other added values, young people, increasing number of young people who can be better educated in order to address the challenges of the future. I think that what is the missing point so far, in my opinion, is looking at this global south still, we must be very honest between us, with a kind of a post-colonialist approach. For instance, a last and very concrete example, we tend to prioritize basic education. I'm not sure that it's the right way to go. I think that young men and women coming from the South should have the right to education up to the highest level. And this means to really completely change the approach and the policies and also the political will, especially from the European Commission, from the two commissioners responsible, Mr. Borrell from the External Service and Ms. Urpilainen from DEFCO. That's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefania Giannini, Deputy Director at the UNESCO. Just summarizing what she said, basically we have to change a post-colonial way to look into this South Global Africa and staying focused not only on natural resources, not only in jobs, not only in mobility, in migration, but also and more because of the story of Europe in the gender issues and in education. Stefania Giannini was underlining how much COVID had an impact on the education system in all the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, especially And also, in my knowledge, the genital female mutilation also is growing a lot because the girls can't go to school, and especially in the Horn of Africa, in Somalia, we know so far that in 1 year a lot happened. So it's very important to share awareness and try to find a way also to protect girls and young people. Thank you very much, Stefania Giannini, for your brilliant introduction, and then we will have for sure now the opportunity to discuss also this topic among our speakers. So I call the floor all the speakers now. We have with us Ruggero Arricò, Vice President at Confindustria, AS Africa and Mediterraneo. I don't know if we have enough chair, but if we don't, yeah, if you want, we can also invite all the speakers who are here in presence. With Ruggero Arricò, we have with us Demir Murat Seyrek, European Foundation for Democracy. You're welcome. And Stephen Everts, who has a very long affiliation, Senior Advisor on Strategy and Communications at European External Action Service. Please. I don't know if I forget somebody, but in my knowledge, there's also Luca Geher, President, European Economic and Social Committee with us, and last but not least, definitely, Hannah Lucinda Smith. Welcome, Hannah. She's with us virtually, and she's correspondent for the Times from Turkey and the Balkans. Welcome, Hannah. Okay, perfect. It's perfect, all of us. We have our chairs. So, Ruggero Arricò, would like to start with you. And we were talking about before, and Stefania Giannini already mentioned, the importance of the resources, of course, in all the 54 states of the continent of Africa. But we are seeing the last years that this economy are growing, and also trade is one of the main way of making business and doing business. So in your knowledge, actually, how much is growing the economy and the trade, and how the COVID-19 impacted on the region, and in which country mostly?
Okay, so good afternoon also from my side. Well, first of all, as a member of the Scientific Committee of Taubuk, so let me also thank the organizer for setting up such an inspiring event. Well, I'm here also with multiple hats. The first one is Vice President of Confindustria, AS Africa and Mediterranean, which is the confederation of all the Italian industries in all sectors with business interests in Africa. And the second one is Director of International Institutional Affairs of Enel Green Power, which is today the Italian multinational company fully dedicated to the promotion and development of renewable energies, which happens to be the first renewable energy private player in the world. And since we have a lot of interest in Africa, because the energy, renewable energy, is one of the key sectors that actually is developing in Africa, we have a big picture of what's going on, especially in this momentum. I will start by saying that Africa is playing an important role in my sector, let's say in all the industrial sector, but specifically on energy, because when I began this job 21 years ago, talking about sustainability, trade, renewable energies, or energy transition, or circular economy in Africa, it was almost impossible. Simply because it was not a priority in the agendas of the governments, whereas nowadays, 20 years later, is exactly the same. No matter which country in Africa has such items as a priority. Why? Because the economic, let's say, growth will pass through the use of renewable energies. Actually, the goal is to have Africa energy independent, and we all know that, for instance, in terms of renewable energies, Africa has the highest reserve, for instance, on solar energy, whereas Africa is using only 1% of the global solar energy in the world. So the room is there, and the historical momentum is there. But at the same time, we have to face the problem of climate change in Africa, because climate change in Africa is impacting a lot us, actually. Because when we talk about natural disaster in Africa, the part natural has nothing to do with what's going on, because there is nothing natural in the disasters in Africa. Because at the end of the day, what we have is, unfortunately, death, climate conflicts that nobody's talking about, migration, and the scarcity of resources such as water, food, or the access to agriculture. So the private sector is playing an important role in order to boost trade in this country. And we all know that in January this year, the Africa Free Continental Trade Area is there. So it means that we create this enormous free trade area, enormous in terms of population, in terms of GDP aggregated. So people and goods can circulate freely. It means, again, a lot of opportunity. So we can use, as an example, the Agenda 2063, the Africa We Want, which is the document that the African Union is putting in place, saying that the trade is the big pillar through which we can have sustainable and inclusive development. So if we use these two words, sustainability and inclusion, for Africa, with the help of the private sector, then we can do a lot.
Thank you very much, Ruggero Arrico, also for your brief presentation of the topic. So we said not only oil is in Africa as mostly energy coming, solar energy, but as Ruggero Arrico said, climate change is going to have a very strong impact on the stability of the countries. We can say and we can mention that, for example, the intervention of some terroristic groups in Southern Africa or in the Corn of Africa or in Sub-Saharan Africa is also something that goes deeply into the climate change and into all the problems related. So we are talking about the role of Europe. But as we said before, there are emerging regional powers who are making a difference and who are doing a lot, most of the time with a kind of soft power, helping some countries opening airports, opening ports, and they're doing it in a different way than Europe. One of these countries is Turkey. So I wish to give the floor to Hannah Lucinda Smith, who's living and reporting from Turkey. And she knows very well the policies of Turkey, not only in the Corn of Africa, but, for example, in Libya. So, Anna, I wish to ask you your perspective, your knowledge. What is the plan of Turkey on Africa, and how Europe can deal with it?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me and also for updating me digitally. A really interesting anecdote. When you go into President Erdogan's main palace in Ankara that he built a few years ago, a sort of huge, famously 1,000-room palace, in the first rooms that you go in, there's a kind of display of photographs, which are clearly a display of the kind of image that Erdogan wants to project. And one of those photographs is a photo of him in Africa, surrounded by children. It doesn't say which country, but it's somewhere in Sub-Saharan Africa, surrounded by children who are clearly kind of very excited to see him. And this is clearly, one of the sort of faces that Erdogan wants to present to at least part of the world, which is as a kind of defender or a champion of countries that are otherwise overlooked, particularly that are overlooked by the West. So I think it's one of the most kind of, underreported and underappreciated things about Turkish foreign policy is the kind of inroads that they've been making in Africa in recent years, not just in Libya, as you said, which, might be considered maybe a sort of natural hinterland, former part of the Ottoman Empire, obviously a Muslim country as well, but also in countries in Sub-Saharan Africa as well. In fact, all over the continent, Turkey's been making a real diplomatic drive to build political links, to build trade links, and also to win hearts and minds. So the interesting thing is it's really a mix of hard and soft power that we're seeing in Africa. First of all, in the wake of the 2016 coup attempt against President Erdogan, one of the kind of facets of Turkish outreach in Africa has been sending diplomats and on occasion sending Erdogan on tours of various kind of blocks of countries to try and persuade governments to close down schools that were run by the Gülen movement. So this is the movement, the kind of Islamist network that Erdogan and the Turkish government accused of organising that coup attempt. Part of the Gülenists' kind of global reach is in their network of schools, very high quality schools in most cases, often in poor countries, many of them in Africa, schools that, as well as giving kind of education in standard subjects, often also taught Turkish. They were considered for a long time kind of Turkish soft power outreach. And it's been a major kind of part of Turkish foreign policy since 2016 to get countries to shut those schools down. And often they've been replaced with a foundation run by the Turkish government called the Maruf Foundation. And it's been quite successful in a lot of countries in Africa. Another part of Turkish outreach is aid. So we see this most kind of clearly in Somalia. President Erdogan and his wife were the first kind of major world leaders for a really long time to visit Somalia after the conflict. I think it was in 2010, perhaps 2011, when they visited Somalia. And ever since, to keep up this connection, a few years ago, there was a campaign by Turkish Airlines to ship a load of aid over as cargo. So that's another facet. Another facet is military. So both in terms of arms sales of Turkish defense equipment. The Turkish defense industry has been growing at a really rapid rate in recent years. And the Turkish government's managed to score some quite significant contracts in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So particularly one that springs to mind from this year, I think February, was sales of some armoured vehicles to Kenya and also to Uganda. And then there's another part of the kind of military side of it is Turkish army presence. So again, coming back to Somalia, one of the biggest, in fact, I think the biggest Turkish overseas military presence is in Somalia. They've built an absolutely massive training Somalian government troops to fight against Al-Shabaab. And then finally, perhaps the more traditional kind of outreach into Africa, and certainly something that we've seen from China, is the construction and reconstruction outreach. So particularly, again, in Somalia, Turkey is it's reconstructing Mogadishu port, it's reconstructing a lot of roads in Somalia, it's making bids all over the place to do similar things with airports, ports, roads, these kind of things. So I think it's really clear when you sort of put all this together, Turkey is making a bid to be in Africa for the long term, not just in places like Libya, where obviously it's kind of, it's got a really vested stake in the conflict there. It's very openly and fully backing the government of national accord in Tripoli. It's sent Turkish military advisors, it's sent Syrian fighters under the kind of Turkish military assistance umbrella. It's sent drones, which have proved absolutely really decisive in the battle against Khalifa Haftar's forces. It's really pushed Haftar back from the gates of Tripoli. But aside from that, I think it's really clear that Turkey is making kind of a bid to be in Africa in the long term. Now, is that a kind of benign or a malign influence? I mean, obviously Turkey would say, no, it's, we're paying attention here to people who have been ignored by the West for far too long. It's absolutely part of our right to do this. Certainly, I think although there are, I think, certainly arguments that there are, signs of that. But I think you know, the question is for the European Union, can it work alongside Turkey, particularly in places like Libya, I think, where at the moment, you know, the interests of the EU and Turkey appear to be clashing somewhat, and certainly the interests of Turkey in certain EU states. You know, Macron in particular has made it very, very clear that he wants all foreign fighters, including Turkish fighters, to withdraw from Libya. So, yeah, I think the question is the EU going to see Turkey as a rival, or is it going to see Turkey as a power that it can work alongside in Africa?
Smith, Times correspondent from Turkey and the Balkans. In this vision, we clearly are seeing how the policies of Erdogan on Africa, especially on the Corn of Africa, are going very, very deep, and they are in different fields, military field, education, infrastructures, and so on. And all these policies are also trying to kick out some other Sunni countries of the Gulf from their interests there, like United Emirates or Morocco, for example. And thank you, Anna Lucinda, for your vision in the relations with Europe, which is there's always this question: do we need to fight Erdogan sometimes, or we have to stand by his side? He is a member of NATO, Turkey, and so on and so on. There are so many issues. Anna Lucinda Smith before mentioned China, and of course China is, you know, we can't say it's a growing power. It's definitely a superpower. It's definitely a superpower, and in Africa, China is working since years and years. So I would like to ask Demir Murat Seyrek, that I remind you is European Foundation for Democracy. China has more than one finger in Africa, and European countries have to deal with it, absolutely. So what's the impact of China? I'm not talking about the economy of Africa, but also in all the communication system, controlling the telecommunications, which is a problem that we are seeing also in US or in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we cannot really, as you said, talk about Africa nowadays without talking about China. But not only China, but also Russia, and to a certain extent Turkey as well. And Hanna summarized Turkey's involvement. But obviously China's involvement beyond all others. And actually both China and Russia, what they are doing in the region, we can to a certain extent compare what Russia and China are doing also in the eastern neighborhood, Middle East, in terms of both increasing economic power, disinformation, propaganda, discrediting EU, democracy, West in general. So it is not very different, but I think the main difference is the EU is much more prepared for the eastern neighborhood, and I think doing quite a good job to at least expose that in the eastern neighborhood. But I think China is doing it much more freely in Africa. That's the main thing. And they are doing, China and Russia, implementing strategies in a different ways. I mean, Russia is more involved in like political influence, military influence, especially through Russian mercenaries. I mean, we can confirm at least 10 African countries with Russian mercenaries. And I don't know if you've seen the recent news about the Central African Republic. They are involved really in killing and torturing of civilians in the country. And China is, yes, using the political influence too, but more through the economic means and reaching out to elites, and even to a certain extent sometimes buying the economic and political elite in the country. And they're also very active in terms of disinformation. And I think the EU is, I mean, Stephen's colleagues are very active, EU versus disinformation, to expose all this, mainly in the eastern neighborhood, but also in the southern neighborhood. And the report in April was also like exposing all that info about COVID time disinformation in Africa, especially about EU's efforts, Western vaccines, etc. And when we see that, I mean, it has, because we always talk about actually like political, economic issues as if they don't affect the daily lives of people. But actually, when you start doing this disinformation about vaccine, it's really about health. I mean, already the vaccination rates are very low in many African countries. And in many of them, now they also believe that the Western vaccines are bad for them because basically Russia and China, they are making the propaganda of their state-sponsored vaccines. And then making all these conspiracy theories about the Western vaccine. So that's a major issue, and we need to see that human element because maybe thousands of more people will die just because of this disinformation. I think that's always the element missing when we talk about disinformation. We see it as a political or economic thing, but I think it's much beyond that. It's really affecting lives of people, and in Africa too. And it's not only about the vaccine, all this disinformation efforts, it's also about anti-West, anti-values, anti-democracy, and they're trying to impose their model. And it was a COVID time, is a perfect opportunity, of course, to show them that, oh, you see, democracies are struggling, especially at the first phase of the crisis. For them, you see, China is doing very well, EU is collapsing, you see Italy, people are dying, France is letting old people to die in the street, etc. All these disinformation efforts to discredit basically the West and position themselves as a big alternative. But of course, there are also different dynamics because when we see from the EU side, there are also major issues because first of all, we cannot really talk about an EU policy towards Africa. I mean, we can talk about member states, different dynamics between member states, their interests as well, but there is no EU policy. And plus, some countries, generally it is valid for the southern neighborhood, they believe that they are so far from the southern neighborhood that Africa doesn't matter for them. But I mean, we're talking about EU, open borders, Schengen, and everything. So, I mean, Africa should be as important for Lithuania as Italy, because it's a direct consequence. I mean, there are security threats, migration, and all. And if Italy is feeling that threat, sooner or later Lithuania will feel too, Sweden will too, Poland will too. So there is this division of some countries taking the eastern neighborhood threats and Russia much more seriously, other countries taking the southern neighborhood threats much more seriously, and sometimes even France is sometimes supporting the same side with Russia, and then Italy is cooperating with Turkey rather than with France. So there are all this also strange dynamics, and basically all countries acting more with the self-interest. And France is, I think, quite unique as well because including Macron, but I think generally the political elite in France, they don't realize that the world has changed. And it's not the old times, it's not the France of 100 years ago, it's not really their backyard anymore. There are other countries as well. I mean, on the one hand, yes, we can criticize all the involvement of these countries, but the French involvement is actually not much different. I mean, on the one hand, yes, we accuse all those countries as a neo-colonialist or imperialist, but what France is doing is not much different than that. So, and it's also, I think, why France is very furious sometimes about it, because they don't really want to accept this new reality in the region that they need to share something, and they cannot do whatever they like. And that was the same, I think, in Syria too, not only in Africa actually. And then the last thing I think we're problematic about the EU. I think for many years actually, European countries supported those regimes, authoritarian regimes, because it was easier to deal with them. I mean, it was also for our profit, it was in our interest to make business with them. But then when China showed up suddenly in Africa, obviously it was easier to deal with them because you need to convince either one person in one country or a group of like feudal powers in one country. So it is very easy to buy influence. So that's why I think that was a strategic mistake, and it is late, but we can still act before it is too late. And rather than just promoting those bilateral relations, also helping them to develop democracy, values, etc. I think we are much more active in that sense in the eastern neighborhood. We are trying to do this in Moldova, in Ukraine, in Caucasus, etc. But in Africa, we don't see that relationship in that way. I mean, there are much less programs in terms of supporting democracy, civil society, in a way that seeing those regions as a democratic region, democratic countries in the future. So that's why I think it is in a way late, and we need to face the reality, but it's not totally late. And if we need to really address all these issues, because there will be consequences of this, obviously. I mean, Italy has been already seeing it, and by the end of the COVID crisis, probably there can be new waves of migration coming in. And then there are other issues connected and not connected, but basically we have actually an indirect new neighbor, which is China in Africa, and we need to face with this.
Thank you very much, Damir Muratse, Iraq. We are going into the main question now. If we still have a post-colonial way of looking to Africa or not. According to what you said, we didn't change, or some European countries didn't change. And I would like to mention what's happening with Denmark, actually. Denmark is doing an externalization of the request of refugee status from some people, some migrants, basically blocking them before taking any plane or any way to go to Denmark. And most of the countries where this process is starting are countries of sub-Saharan Africa. So here we are, I can say, in the heart of the issue. So I would like to ask to Stephen Everts, and I remind that Stephen Everts is Senior Advisor on Strategy and Communications at the European External Action Service. So we're talking about the communication and about this post-colonial way of looking to Africa and the reaction that is still going on in Africa against Europe. With all the influence of some kind of propaganda about other powers that oppose Europe. So how is possible to change our behavior, or how is possible also to contrast this propaganda? Which kind of communication, which kind of actions we can take place?
Sure. Well, thanks very much for those questions and for the invitation and for the colleagues for their contributions already, to which I would like to respond, and then hopefully we still have a little bit of time, but I'll go rapidly. So I think indeed the strategic question that Europe faces is which societal model will prevail in Africa. I think I'm very aware that this is the strategic question. We've heard about China, we've heard about Turkey, we've heard about Russia, and I think people in Brussels and across Europe need to frame it in these terms. And indeed, in 20 years' time, Africa will have 1 billion people more. And under what kind of model will these people live? And this is a question really of planetary consequences. And we need to think it in these terms. Now, Africa is going to be more crowded in a demographic sense, but also in a political sense, because we have all these other actors now present. In a way, it's a good thing, right? It means that Africa has more choices, has more options. Now, life is good if you have more options, but again, I think we should be acutely aware of the kinds of value systems that people are bringing to Africa. And Africa, I mean, parenthesis, Africa. Africa is a continent, 54 countries, there's so many different, but at least let us make us one distinction analytical between elites, which may have certain preferences. Elites can be also very undemocratic, very authoritarian, very repressive, which may make certain choices to make certain alliances. Doesn't mean that Africa is happy with that. Because African citizens, African young people, African are contesting that old model as well. So a lot of competition and pressure on Europe, and we talk a lot about it, but let's also not fall in the easy trap that Africa has voted for China and the Chinese model. I don't think it's true. I really don't think it's true. Secondly, let's keep a sense of proportions as well. Turkey more active, for sure. China there, Russian military advisors and other things, Gulf. But the European Union spends 20 billion in aid every year in Africa. 20 billion, yeah? China, 4 to 5 in loans. There's a difference, guys, between grants and loans. Let's not conflate everything with everything, you know? There's a very good PR exercise that is going on, but, you know, let's put some facts there. Now, I think indeed we have to build a better narrative, and we haven't done it. For all sorts of reasons, the European Union is not very good at narrative. There's a story that an African diplomat told me, you know, some countries make us offers that we cannot refuse. Europe makes us an offer we don't understand. And it's a very nice anecdote, you know.
Makes sense.
Yeah. It's probably the only thing you're going to remember of my presentation, because the anecdote is what people remember. It's a very telling anecdote, that's why I remember it. And in this narrative, we need to be more radical, we need to be more creative. Diplomacy, in my view, is about imagining a different future and figuring out a way to get there. And this is what we need to do with Europe-Africa relations in all their diversity and complexity. I personally don't like the continent or a relationship of equals. I think if you have to say this, then you already aren't. So I don't like this tagline. I like the sister continent better, because it speaks to facing challenges, enormous challenges, sustainable development, climate, together. And I think we need to go very much beyond this bilateral prism and position EU-Africa relations much more in a global context. What kind of societal, economic model, renewables, I mean, how is that all going to be? And is that going to be done around respect for the individual, around, you know, fundamental freedoms, around principles and multilateralism? Or is it going to be around another set of values and principles? So this is the big question. This is the why and the strategy. Now rapidly on how, policy questions. Who, what, how? 3 things. I would say build African capacities above all else. This is the number one, because nothing is possible without local capacities. We cannot do it for other people. For God's sake, I hope that we've learned that, at least. I will not deny that sometimes in the European Union system, there are still people wedded to that other kind of way of thinking, not my. But at the same time, let's also acknowledge that there are in many African countries authoritarian leaders, or that there is a sort of a state capture by certain operators. And there is a problem with corruption in certain places. And we should speak openly about these things and not be shy about it, because we should be on the side of African citizens who, like us, don't want to live in a country of those characteristics. Secondly, let's focus really on the future. Let's, you know, go beyond the Francafrique and other ways, and you know, it's gender, women empowerment, you know, digital payment systems. There are all sorts of things I think we can do. When national authorities are not, let's say, the prime partner that we want to work with, let's work with local partners, let's work with NGOs, let's work with women groups, let's work with whoever we can work with. Let's be very sort of mindful of the strategic context, but very flexible and very granulated in our approach. And then very much I agree with what Murat said. What we need in the European Union is, this cannot be a preserve of France, Italy. Look, we're meeting today in Sicily. It's not difficult to explain people that Africa matters in Sicily, right? It literally is there. Yeah? But it is true, when you go to the European Council, when the leaders meet and they had a discussion on Africa, it was, and this is Chatham House rules, I hope, lamentable. There were like 4 or 5 countries taking the floor, and they were the ones that you would expect. This is not a way to build a European strategy for Africa. But, and I want to say this as well, the flip side is also true. That means that Italy needs to be interested in the East. And you know, you need to be interested in each other's problems, I think, in the European Union. And not sub-delegate it to the frontline states. Policy will actually improve if Lithuania is more interested in EU-Africa. That means that the usual suspects don't control the policy, and the policy will get better for it. But, you know, it has to come from all sides, not only Lithuania being interested in Africa, but also Italy and others being interested in problems that perhaps they're not so engaged with today. Last, and as a coda, Brexit. This could be a good story for the European Union and the UK to work together. But tomorrow we're going to have a panel on Brexit, and at the moment it's very poisonous, and it's you know, tied up with sausages in Northern Ireland, and I hope that we can overcome that. But in principle, the UK and the European Union have a very similar agenda on you know, SDGs and empowerment and rights and climate and all these things. And it could be a good way of repairing that dysfunctional relationship as well. So let me stop there. Happy to discuss.
Thank you, Stephen Everett. And so we said less bureaucracy at the end of the day, if it's possible. And not only relations with governmental figures, but mostly with local partners, right? And trying also to learn from the Brexit thing and to do something useful for both the countries and, you know, the relation with the continent that we said it's better to call a sister continent unless an equal or something to conquer or reconquer. There's Rogero Rico wants to say something.
Actually, that there is a young generation of African politicians which is completely different from the past. So it is true that we have to work with the citizens, but these young leaders actually have clear the vision of how Africa should be in the future, meaning that they don't want to live on the generosity from the West, from the European Union taxpayers to build up their education system, wealth system. So they know which is the way to do, because this huge way of young people will be there actually. So it's also impossible to manage from us. So
sure,
they know.
And also something that is not new.
I mean, I take the example of Rwanda, for instance. You know, Rwanda is super, maybe, well, I know very well Rwanda is one of my best favorite country in the world, because in a few years they moved from, I don't know, the symbol of poverty to the sustainable model that everybody should look at.
Yeah, and also in Senegal, if we look at Sankara and all the countries that made the revolution, and they're still doing revolution in the streets because they don't want corruption anymore. And this is something we see in Middle East, and we saw in the east of Europe, and now we're seeing in Sub-Saharan Africa. So I think we are running out of time, but there is still, Luca Geher is with us online. Right, Francesco, I will ask to the editor-in-chief of the director of the vision. Luca Geher, President of European Economic and Social Committee. Do you have any remarks on that? Some comments about it?
Thank you so much for the invitation. I am no more the President of the European Economic and Social Committee. I've closed my mandate.
I'm sorry for the wrong affiliation.
Last October, but it doesn't mind. I've been for 3 years and a half. So thank you for this invitation. Thank you to Stefania Giannini for having proposed to put this subject in this conference. I want to say 4 things. The first one is that I was super happy at the beginning of the mandate of the Ursula von der Leyen Commission that she put Africa very, very high in the priority of the new Commission. You should remember that the 2 first political acts of von der Leyen have been first to present in a special session of the European Parliament the Green Deal strategy, and the second one, before Christmas 2018, she went with half of the College of the Commissioner to Addis Ababa to have a meeting with the Commissioner of the African Union. And a few months later, at the beginning of March 2020, the Commission has presented a new communication towards a comprehensive strategy for Africa. It was, as Stefania Giannini was mentioning, this 5 pillars. Yeah, they forgot perhaps education, youth, civil society, and culture, and so far and so on. But they put a clear element of a strategy on the floor. But the pandemic arrived. And the pandemic, from my point of view, has a little bit stopped this direction. Perhaps not in the intention of von der Leyen and mainly of Jutta Urpilainen, but I think that for the moment has stopped. First, because the effect of the pandemic in Africa, where it has not been so strong in terms of death, hospitalization, and people infected, although we do not have enough data perhaps to collect the situation, but it seems that it has not been as in the rich country, in the north part of the world, but they had an enormous impact on the economy. This, at large, the continent has lost a lot in terms of revenue, of export of raw material. The large part of the country of this continent have devaluated their currency. The internal debt has grown so much and now is coming back as a core issue for the future of this country. And even the Special Rapporteur for the United Nations for Poverty has estimated that perhaps Africa will have, at the end of this year, 100 million more people in extreme poverty. And so, if we come to 2021, we have to take stock of, I have no other word to define, the biggest failure in the global strategy of Europe towards Africa, that is the vaccine strategy. At the moment, Africa got only 1% of the global production of vaccine. So I understand that China is doing their misinformation, their campaign, but from the other side, except the good work and the good presence of the Team Europe all around Africa, we have not delivered the vaccine. And if we will not the winner or will not partner with Africa in this vaccination campaign, it's not only providing vaccine, it's also providing capacity of production and capacity of inoculation, because we all know the state, the condition of the health sector in large part of the African continent. So if we deal the consequence of the pandemic in terms of impact on health, on education, on riches, on economy, on social fabric, and we put this together with the impact of the growing extreme climate change in Africa, we will have an increase of insecurity, an increase of extremism. And we see all the Sahel now is crossed by the parent of ISIS. We have Mozambique that is exploding again. And unfortunately, we have one of the 4 wheel of the Africa future that was Ethiopia. The Tigray crisis is going down and is going in a dark past. So this should be the first element of our strategy. The third reflection is about one thing that we seem not to have understood, and we seem not to have evaluated at the proper level. Africa, for the first time, out of the Chinese, out of the Russian, out of the Turkish, out of the Arab Gulf, and out of Europe, has established its own major strategy for the year to come, due to the leadership of Paul Kagame, the past president of the African Union. 2 years ago, they agreed all together the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. That means Africa wants to build up its internal market. And behind the pandemic time, the 1st of January of this year, they made a big event where Europe was not present or was not invited, where they inaugurated the start of this, of the General Secretariat and the establishment and the start of this new trade continental agreement. Here I see that China, United States, Turkey and the other have no competence perhaps to help Africa to build up. It's not only about investment, it's about all the legal framework, the standard framework. We know as Europe. We know in Europe that building up the internal market, we have made a difference for progress and development. So I think that here there is a clear element of a strategy, forward-looking strategy of clear partnership with Africa. It's not new colonialism or new imperialism, not France-Afrique or whatever we can think about. Where we can be partner, we can partner African Union to help them to build up what they have already chosen to do, perhaps starting from the regional markets that has to build up. This could become the driver for the future. And how she thinks this alliance with Africa, the sister continent, or as von der Leyen was said, is the natural partner and neighbor, with the biggest trade agreement Europe has in the world today, with Japan, can make the difference in the balance of power worldwide in the years to come. And last comment, because we are out of time, I want to add only to all Stefania Giannini has said that I fully agree that we have to focus a lot, as the advisor for communication of DIS has said, with the civil society organization, employer, workers, farmers, women, artists, small enterprise, artisan, informal economy. We have to work with them, to empower them, to make them to grow, to be organized. And on the other side, there is also the cultural sector that is a driving force. We want only to mention the force of the new Renaissance Museum, inaugurated 1.5 years ago in Dakar. Was the dream of Leopold Sédar Senghor. That is the way to take stock of the identity, of a continental identity, or the role of the fashion industry in Africa, starting from Ethiopia to Senegal to many others, that is becoming a driving force. If we deal this partner with the building in the year to come of the internal market, with the sustainable development and the green agenda with Africa, and with also the reshoring agenda, because a lot of companies from China, Vietnam, Bangladesh are moving from this country and going to Africa to produce. We have to be part of this process of reshoring. The reshoring should not be only done towards Europe, the 27 member countries. We can make this investment for also industrialization using the reshoring process to help Africa to build up a secure, a fair, and a solid transition to the industrial age. So I see that beside the pandemic, where we will engage seriously in the vaccination campaign and the building up of a serious cooperation to strengthen the health system, there is a very forward-looking agenda where Europe is today perhaps the most equipped to help Africa to build up their future for what they have already decided this continental agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca Geher, and for bringing on the floor a lot of topics, questions. There are so many things to discuss, starting from the fact that pandemic had a very strong impact on any kind of trade in Africa, but also was something we can say an opportunity, a political opportunity, and this should be taken in consideration. Maybe we have to stop to say that we help Africa, but we cooperate with Africa, maybe. So I think on this point, all the panelists agree. I would like to take questions from the floor, but we are really running out of time, so I'm very sorry. And our speakers, in case I will be available later on. So thank you, everyone, for being here. I just want to thank again our panelists, Stefania Giannini, Deputy Director at UNESCO, Ruggero Arrico, Vice President of Confindustria Africa, Anna Lucinda Smith, correspondent from Turkey and the Balkans from The Times, Demir Mural Seyrak, European Foundation for Democracy, Stephen Everts, Senior Advisor on Strategy. It's a very long affiliation, I'm sorry. And then, in the end, Luca Geher, thank you for being with us, and thank you for following this panel. Thank you.